Hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friends, Sam Clement and Courtney Tross. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey, John.
Hey, guys. I hope y'all are doing well today.
Doing fantastic.
Fantastic. Guys, over the weekend I was thinking about it and believe it or not, Sam, Courtney, I was thinking about the upcoming employment situation report because here we are. People are terribly worried that the economy is going to shift into recession. Markets haven't performed terribly well during April of 2022. And yet, while a lot of the economic data remains reasonably strong, particularly the labor markets, there seems to be one area where you just can't find people to work no matter what you do. And it seems to be, child care centers are hurting.
And that's an area that, one, impacts so many people, but two, it seems like, inflation is seen by people, but, we've called it the silent killer, but people not finding workers is something that it's so evident to see, whether it is the child care industry or restaurants. I mean, every single American can very clearly see that there's an issue going on with the labor market.
Oh, for sure. And just kind of doing some quick research, looking at the labor force participation, as of January 2022, it was at 61.6%, which, John and Sam, is that surprising to you at all?
Well, it's gone up a little bit from there, but not terribly much, and we're well below where we were actually before the pandemic, and certainly well below where we were all-time highs back in the late 1990s as the baby boomers were going through the workforce. It is and it isn't surprising to me. First off, we've had a lot of the older people in our society. Our society's older than it was. As people age, they opt out of the workforce. Then we had COVID hit, and a lot of people over the age of 65 just said, done. Over the age of 60, said done. But what we've also seemed to have, and this more taking a look, and you really have to delve down into the numbers and get real nerdy real quick, but it doesn't seem as though women are returning to the workforce quite as rapidly as men are.
Yeah, and when we're talking about labor force participation rates, even 1%, that's millions of workers. That's a lot of people when we throw around some of these numbers. But you're right, and I think it goes along with, since COVID, we've talked about it actually having brought forward a lot of trends much quicker than maybe they previously. Technology is a good example, and working remote, a lot of that demand over the next decade was probably pulled forward. And it makes me wonder if that's another area where, a trend has kind of been pulled forward and compressed into a much shorter timeline, is people not coming back to work and, going back to a time where a single income household is normal and working for people. And I'm wondering if that's another example of this.
Yeah, to your point, Sam, looking at females versus males, you've got potentially 56.8%, not potentially, that is 56.8% are female versus 67.9% males making up that labor force participation. And as a female myself, something that I struggle with is, when you are paying so much for childcare, and with every little thing, every little bug or something happens, it's an argument, right, between the two parents. Who's going to stay home? Who's the one that's got to, call their boss and say, hey, I can't come in today? Maybe, to your point, they can work remotely, but you're also looking at people who might not have that luxury. Maybe they physically clock in and clock out, and the average cost of childcare, I've definitely firsthand experienced that, has gone up, but yet hours are still being reduced. And, it went up for COVID because they had extra cleaning, all that. And I'm not saying that they've taken that away, but they definitely haven't lowered back down any prices. And they said, just again, researching this because it's near and dear to my heart, they said that it's increased 41%, the cost. And you're now average across all states, for one child in daycare for annually, you're paying around $14,000. It's just ridiculous.
That's a fortune. But going back to something that you said in terms of the extra cleaning that they had to do to COVID and whether or not they're still doing it, that's the implication. I don't care if you spray Clorox around the place. It's a child care center. It's going to be filthy, dirty, nasty with germs. At least maybe Courtney's children were much cleaner than mine were. Not to say that my children weren't clean, but Courtney, what's weird about the child care center or the child care industry is we talk about child care. We talk about child care. And what it really is private school for babies. Because
right.
That's kind of what it is. Because, hey, you don't really talk about private school for babies. Because then when you go, your kids probably go to public school, K through 12, and it's public school. You know, Homewood, Hoover, Mountain Brook, Vestavia. Most people send their kids to public school. But it's that gap from birth to K where we call it child care. But come on, we're coming off the hip for quite a bit of money, and you're $14,000 across the country. Back when my children are doing is $700 a month or something like that,
Yep.
and that starts to add up. I mean, it really does. And so you're absolutely right, Courtney. The more kids that you have, and what's weird is you don't get a bundle discount for the
Right.
for the
No,
trust
you
family.
don't.
And
You
so
don't.
it's it's 80, it's 1,000 for that kid. Well, guess what? It's going to be 1,000 for that one.
Yeah.
It's going to be 1,000 for that one. And unfortunately, there's not a real good answer for it. I don't know what the answer for it is because it's a sticky wicket because parents want to make sure that their kids go to a child care center which is fully licensed, fully accredited, where they've got qualified people, they're pretty pictures, they're going to be building blocks, going to be teaching ABCs, maybe even a couple of words in Spanish or French, that type of thing. You want all these things, but like you said, it's costing you $14,000 a year.
And
Times 1, times 2, times 3, depending on the number of kids that you have. And very few people who are of child rearing age, you know, sort of late 20s, 30s, I mean, you know, basically 20s and 30s for the most part in this area, are making so much money that they can put 4 kids through private school from birth to K and not have it have a real pinch on their checkbook.
And, you know, we mentioned that the labor market's tight, but this is obviously an area where you can't just sign anybody up who wants to come work. I mean, they're
I'm sure they're trying.
I mean,
Yeah.
but you get what I'm saying. There's stricter requirements and expectations for the type of people that they can hire, and I'm sure background checks and just all this kind of stuff that, hey, if you're getting 13, 14 bucks an hour for that, or I can go get 18 tomorrow, no questions asked, which one of those am I going to do?
Right. And the high turnover and all of that. And I think that for the parents, I mean, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place because they need childcare. And they can't really go to the open market and try to get anybody because that's just as competitive to have someone sit at your house and you're going to be paying more.
It's even more expensive.
Yeah, it's even more expensive.
And I even laughed a little when you said private school for babies, but there's a developmental part of this
for
school
sure.
too. You know, it's not physically just, hey, I can't watch my kid for 6 to 8 hours
Right.
a day.
Unfortunately, there are some places where that is basically what it is.
I'm sure, but, you know, I mean, the expectation with that amount of money should probably be that you're going to get some development out of your
Right,
kid.
and I think the point is like if you truly do, if you're a single parent and you don't have the option just to stay home, I guess we won't go into that option, but
What do you mean?
in general, you know, you would need to work and you've got to have some margin of actually, you know, profiting from your work. And so, you know, it is drastically affecting lower income families who, you know, don't have an option. And it's sad to me, John, because you're saying, you know, there are places in which you drop your kids and they really are just watching them. They're not necessarily educating them. And that can go down a whole different, you know, conversation for the day.
I'm not prepared for that conversation today, by the way.
But I do think, you know, that does pull on the heartstrings of parents when they are debating, okay, so I'm bringing home an extra whatever, but we're both working, we're stressed out, we're arguing more because when someone gets sick, which inevitably, as John pointed out, it's, you know, just a cesspool of different nasty germs with kids. And so inevitably they're going to get sick. And I think that people look at that and maybe through COVID, they were like, is it worth it anymore? And I've known several people who have said, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth the fights for this period of time. One of the spouses is going to exit the workforce.
Well, and I think this may be another thing. You know, we've talked about education since COVID and how you're probably going to see a ripple effect for really maybe even decades. I mean, there's going to be a seismic impact from it. And this could be another area that we see a seismic impact, whether it's from, you know, birth rates in America dropping. You know, that's been a developed country issue for years. Maybe that continues. Maybe it gets worse. And then the other one's the labor force participation rate, like you were talking about. I mean, maybe that gap between men and women widens further and maybe the total rate goes down. I mean, I think could have kind of a whole host of ripple effects off of this.
And the ripple effects aren't really positive, really, overall for
Right.
society, particularly when it comes to inequality. And this is where I could get people that will take issue with me on this. But if a family decides, rightly or wrongly, that we just can't afford 15 grand per kid. We have all these children. We got 13 kids, and all that stuff. That's a lot of money that's going out the door. One of us has to stay home, and more often than not, it's the mother. Motherly instincts, maybe for whatever reason.
Women also make less money than men typically.
I wasn't going there, but in any event,
it's a hot topic for
hot
me.
topic.
For next week.
Yeah.
But generally, it's the mother that stays home, which obviously takes her out of the workforce during her peak sort of career slope or
Right.
trajectory,
Yep.
which hurts their marketability, and then we kind of. It's a never-ending, vicious cycle.
And it can hurt kind of, on an individual level, but if we expand that out to our entire economy and a large percentage of half the workforce leaving the workforce at their peak earnings times, I mean, that has even more ripple effects down into, say, the debt levels that our country has. I mean, it can just continue on and on and on when we look at the last time we had a balanced budget, the amount of people in the workforce, the amount of tax revenue that was being brought in, those kinds of things. If people aren't in the workforce, I mean, you are going to struggle having the same level of economic growth and GDP in a country.
And obviously, we want to continue to grow. We want our population to grow and be
Well, it
able
has
to
to.
educate. Right. So that should be a priority of, our country as well. To look at, okay, well, we want to encourage people to have children and to build a certain family dynamic or whatever that looks like, and it's just very hard to do that when someone's having to take a step out of the workforce potentially. I think there should just something to noodle on.
Well, it's more than just noodling. We're touching on something that's very serious. I mean, we have an aging population. We have more people requiring Social Security or depending on it. Baby boomers are coming through, and they're going to start retiring en masse. And so we need to have more workers underneath them in the workforce earning money, paying their FICA taxes, so the whole thing doesn't unravel where we have to borrow trillions of dollars more. So something that we can do in order to increase that labor force participation rate amongst women, and men as well, but primarily amongst women, has a beneficial impact to the overall finances of the country, as it will allow more taxation to come through payroll taxes and outside in order to help fund the entitlements programs that we've built, through the goodness of our hearts and what have you. And right now we're saying, well, to heck with it. Okay, we'll give you the child tax credit. All that stuff. Well, that doesn't really cover it. That helps, but that's not the $15,000 per year. That's not really helping with the discussion of, hey, I need to stay home, or I need to go to work, or what can we do? I'm not buying my creamer any longer, right, Courtney? Or something like that. I don't know. You know darn well you're going to buy your creamer no matter what happens. So, Sam, it does take me to a point with this out there, with all the money that we are pissing away doing so many different things. Why do we even have private school for babies?
Well, I think that's a fantastic question, and it goes back to just the mismanagement of the spending that we do have already. I mean, we don't have a lack of revenue problem, or we're spending enough money to fix a lot of these issues. I mean, you can compare it to other countries with free childcare, and I'm not going to, well, we spend a ton of money on programs to better people, and we do a clearly very poor job of it.
Well, I think you're right on that, but where I'm kind of going with this is, if I'm paying however many mills I'm paying in the military, and being tax, property taxes, funding a school system, what I really need, or what maybe my community really needs, isn't just K through 12. Damn it, I might need some little help from 6 months to K, if you catch my drift.
I agree.
Right.
And who really has the resources? The Trust family does have the resources, or does Norris family, the Clement family, or does maybe the city of Hoover, city of Homewood, city of Mount Brook, if we put all these things together, maybe there might be enough economies of scale where we can alleviate some of this problem. And yet no one's talking about this, and it's ridiculous why we're not, because we're preaching equality. Women today have it very difficult, because you're supposed to be a fantastic mom, you're supposed to be a fantastic mother, you're supposed to be you're supposed to earn, you're supposed to be doing this, that, and the other thing.
Great wife.
All that stuff.
Equal work.
And so, whereas all I'm supposed to do is sit on the couch, and that's fine. But the message is very strange, because we're saying you got to do all this type of stuff. Oh yeah, when your kids get 5 or 6, we'll help you out then. But when you're having babies, guess what? You're on your own.
And it seems like that's an area where the economy could really get a decent return on its investment.
I think so. Completely.
I mean, I think there needs to be limits to government's reach and areas that we're spending money and just needing more taxes just to do it. But I mean, that is an area that could very clearly have positive impacts and change really the trajectory of our country, both in terms of population, in terms of our economic growth. If we had well-run programs like that, really since birth, to allow people to get back into the workforce if they wanted to.
Well, and I know in the state of Alabama, we did create a pre-K program, but from my understanding, it's for 4-year-olds, right? So it's just that 1 year before they go to kindergarten, in which it's subsidized by the government. But and a lot of times it's at certain schools. So maybe certain schools and certain districts will have it, but it's a lottery. But it's also it came off to me that it was partially determined by your household income, and so it's kind of the middle class that kind of gets the shortest end of the stick, because they might need it just as much as someone that's low income, because if you look at the percentage of their net income that they're spending on this daycare cost, and especially, John, to your point, you're not getting a discount if you have more kids. And so it's like, I just think that the other factors should be considered. And obviously, if we could fund it and do it successfully, that you could extend it. And I mean, I like the idea that it would be an extension of, existing, public school. But I know that there's certain areas in which maybe we wouldn't want that. So, but that is...
I think it just needs to be viewed as an area of investment and not just dumping money away. And I think that change of mindset could really shift the conversation around that.
Yeah, and particularly with all the furor or turmoil or news that's in the public school systems as we talk right now, and it just seems as though everyone's angry at their local school board or what have you. This probably does need some investigation.
Yeah.
See whether or not this actually does make sense. And it might not be kind of a one-size-fits-all across the board. It might be that, for a wealthy neighborhood like a Homewood or a Hoover, a Mountain Brook or something like that, that they decide, okay, this is going to be a priority. Whereas maybe some other communities might not be able to do it, but they get some assistance from the state or the feds and are able to enact something. However, the way that it's currently going on, in my estimation, it's going to be difficult to fill these positions. It's going to be difficult given the pay that they can these places can pay, and it's going to be difficult to raise the cost of childcare too much more without people just completely opting out of it. So, at what point does the long arm of government come in, because it does have the economies of scale, which in this instance the private sector doesn't appear to have, in order to help out? Whereas the difference is, oftentimes when the government comes in to try to help out when the private sector is actually doing quite a decent job. This is one of those ones where I think that there's just not enough capacity for the demand. We're forcing largely women out of the workforce, and a lot of kids in a lot of neighborhoods are just simply getting left behind.
And I don't imagine this crowding out the private sector either.
No.
I mean, we are at such a gap in the supply and demand that it seems like you could very easily up the supply without really hurting the demand for those maybe upper end kind of.
Listen, people, if anyone's listening to this in Manhattan, they're going, I don't know what you're talking about. There's plenty of, birth through K, 30,000, 40,000 hours a year, that type of stuff. And those people that are willing to do that probably aren't going to go, okay, I'm going to send my kid now to PS 36 or something like that. So, I don't think the upper end are probably still going to pay for it. It's that sort of that second, third, and fourth quintiles are really going to be able to take advantage of this. That's the so-called middle class by definition. And then it will give certain people that are right there at the fringe, okay, I want to spend 1 year off with my, take 1 year off with my kid, but something along those lines gives them flexibility where they don't have to make a career-ending decision or a career-threatening decision.
And it's not just, the cost and all of that. It's also just general access to childcare. I mean, there are rural areas in which they don't have easy access, but even here in central Alabama, there's easily a 2-year waiting list for many childcare, or at least maybe even the top ones might have 3+ years, where you will real be on the waiting list. So if you say obviously you don't have children yet, but if you were wanting children in a certain period of time, you might go ahead and just put baby Clement And that's the name, and they have you on the waiting list because you don't know and you want to be ready if that
That's
spot
actually
comes
not
up.
bad advice, truthfully.
I know.
That's really not. But Courtney, but that's for you're talking about for full-time care.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, even some
I mean,
Mother's Day outs, it's waiting list.
A lot of so-called child care centers are really more Mother's Day out programs, and a lot of them, a lot of church-based ones, which might not go all day long, and so
sure.
it just makes it a little bit more difficult. So here we are reaching the end of this today, and I'm not sure if we really trade perspectives or really advance the ball terribly far, but it is something that our society is going to need to come to grips with. If we want women to work, if we want women to have a sharp trajectory in their careers, if we want children to be well educated, we want all these things for our society, we want to have more children, we need to make it easier for people to stay at work, not lose their jobs, not have to reduce their hours, reduce their pay, and while at the same time making sure that the kids are someplace safe and are being stimulated effectively and efficiently. And I hate to say it because I normally don't feel this way. At this point in time, hell, the government does everything else, gets involved in everything else. Why don't we explore whether or not we take K through 12 to something like 6 months or 12 months to 12?
I think we all agree it just needs to be more of a priority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think generally people, I mean, myself included, have to change our mindset associated with people with children. And it needs to just be, I mean, across the board. If we are going to prioritize everything you just listed, John, then we all have to have a more open mind to what that looks like. And it's not going to look maybe like it does right now for everybody.
I can't believe I'm saying this. I agree with you, Courtney.
You're so forward thinking, John.
Hardly. Guys, we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakwood.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more, hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, please, by all means, go to oakwood.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of interesting information. Give you guys one last chance.
That's all I got.
That's it, John.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.